My hands were shaking before my boots even touched the ground. The alarm had torn me out of sleep with a sound I had never heard before, a signal screaming across a frequency that no human machine used. I was the only one awake who could read it, so the shuttle doors opened for me alone, and within minutes I was dropping through freezing clouds toward a valley that should have been empty. It was not empty. The valley floor was black volcanic rock, cracked and cold, and my shuttle lights swept across 4 small shapes huddled together in the frost. My mind said turn back. My training said call for backup, but my body was already moving before either voice finished speaking. They were crying. Not the roar I expected from creatures with wings and claws and long curved tails. It was a thin, broken sound, so close to a frightened child that something old and unthinking took over inside my chest. I dropped to my knees on the freezing stone and opened my arms without deciding to. All 4 of them ran to me at once. They pressed their small bodies against my suit, trembling, and one of them wrapped its tail tightly around my wrist and refused to let go. Up close they were no bigger than large dogs, their scales a deep, dusty red, their wings still soft and folded tight. I did not know what they were. I only knew they were terrified and they had chosen me. "Where is your family?" I whispered, mostly to hear my own voice steady. None of them answered because of course they could not, but the smallest one pushed its face harder into my shoulder, and I held on tighter. That is when the ground began to hum. It was not an earthquake. It was rhythm, low and enormous, rolling through the rock like the valley itself had a heartbeat. I looked up, and the sky I had flown through only minutes earlier, empty except for thin stars, was no longer empty at all. Shapes were rising over the ridgeline, one after another, blotting out entire sections of the sky. Then more. Then too many to count. Wings stretched from one side of the horizon to the other, and the sound of thousands of powerful bodies moving through the air became a roar that shook the frost off the stones around me. I should have run. Every part of my training told me to run, but the 4 small dragons in my arms were not afraid anymore. They were still shaking, but it was a different kind of shaking now, something closer to relief. The first of the massive shapes landed close enough that the wind from its wings threw me backward onto the rock, the children still clinging to me the whole way down. It rose above me, easily 3 times the height of my shuttle, its scales a deep bronze that seemed to drink in what little light there was. Its eyes were a burning amber, and they fixed on me the moment I looked up. It lowered its enormous head slowly, until one eye was level with mine, and it made a low sound deep in its chest. It was not a growl. It was closer to a question. I understood the tone, even though I did not understand the words. "They were alone," I said, my voice shaking almost as much as my hands. "They were crying. I could not just leave them there." The huge dragon studied me in silence. Behind it, the sky kept filling, wave after wave descending into the valley until the whole basin glowed faintly with the reflected light of thousands of watching eyes. My mind struggled to hold the size of what was happening. An entire species was arriving, and I was kneeling in the middle of it with 4 of their children pressed against my chest. Then the great dragon did something I did not expect. It lowered itself to the ground and folded its wings, bowing its massive head in front of me, a single human with no weapon raised, no army behind me, nothing but 4 frightened children in my arms. I did not move. I did not know if moving would be safe, so I stayed exactly where I was, breathing hard, while thousands of dragons watched their leader bow to a stranger. Later, I would learn what had happened that night, piecing it together slowly through gestures, patience, and the small handful of sounds the young ones eventually taught me. A hunting group of something fast and vicious had crossed through the valley earlier that night, scattering a group of hatchlings from the adults guarding them. In this species, when an adult loses track of a crying child, even for a few minutes, something close to panic spreads through the whole group. The entire clan had taken to the sky within moments, crossing what must have been hundreds of miles, because 4 small voices had gone quiet. They had not gone quiet, they had found me instead. And somehow, in the frost and the wind and the impossible weight of that moment, that had been enough. The great dragon lifted its head again, and this time its eyes held something different. Not suspicion, not warning, something closer to gratitude, the same feeling I had felt myself less than an hour earlier, kneeling in the cold with my arms open to strangers who could not speak my language. Behind it, one by one, the other dragons began lowering their heads toward the stone. I stayed there until the sky began to turn gray with early morning light. My communicator buzzed twice with worried messages from the station, but I did not answer either one. I could not explain what was happening in a short message, and honestly, I was not sure I understood it myself yet. By the time the sun rose fully over the ridge, the 4 young dragons had fallen asleep against me, exhausted from their long night of fear. The huge bronze one, the one who seemed to lead the others, stayed close, never taking its eyes off the small ones curled against my chest. When my supervisor, a calm woman named Grace, finally reached the valley in a second shuttle, she stopped the moment she saw the scene in front of her. Thousands of dragons filled the rocks and sky around a single human sitting perfectly still, covered in sleeping hatchlings, surrounded by creatures none of us had ever documented before. "Do not move," she said quietly through the comm in my ear. "Let them decide what happens next." I almost laughed, as if I had any other choice. It took nearly 3 hours before the great bronze dragon finally stepped back, allowing space for me to stand without feeling threatened. The 4 young ones woke slowly, blinking in the morning light, and one by one they climbed off me and returned to the adults waiting nearby. The smallest one paused before leaving, its tail brushing gently against my hand one last time, almost like a goodbye. I stood there in the middle of thousands of watching eyes, cold, exhausted, and completely changed by what had just happened. No weapon had been drawn. No words had passed between us that either side truly understood. And yet somehow, trust had been built in the space of a single terrifying night. Grace walked slowly toward me once the dragons began to shift, some already lifting into the sky in small groups, wings catching the early light. "What happened here?" she asked, staring at the scene around us. "I do not fully know," I admitted. "I think they were just scared, all of them, the little ones and the big ones both." She looked at me for a long moment, then turned back toward the thinning crowd of enormous creatures still filling the valley. "This changes everything," she said. "We came here expecting silence. We were not expecting this." Over the following months, I returned to that valley many times, slowly learning small signals, small sounds, enough to build the beginning of real communication with a species none of us had known existed a year earlier. The bronze dragon, the one who had bowed to me that first morning, became something like a steady presence in those visits, always watching from a distance, never fully leaving. I never learned exactly why the young ones had run to me instead of hiding from a stranger. Maybe it had nothing to do with being human at all. Maybe it was only about being the first living thing that knelt down in the cold and opened its arms when something small was crying alone in the dark. Whatever the true reason, that single choice, made in less than a second, changed the future for both of our worlds. It was, as far as any of us could tell, the first time humans and this ancient species had ever stood face to face without fear driving the moment. I still remember the way the sky looked that night, filled edge to edge with wings, amber eyes glowing above cold black stone, all because 4 frightened children had found someone willing to hold them. I remember the silence that followed, heavier and more powerful than any noise could have been. And I remember thinking, as the sun finally rose over that valley, that sometimes the biggest moments in history do not begin with plans or strategies or careful decisions. Sometimes they begin with someone simply choosing not to walk away.